Hello, my name is Helen Parker. I'm 78 years old, and I'm going to share with you the story that completely transformed my life. Before I continue, please be kind enough to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that my story is reaching different places. It was 1972. I was 25 years old and believed I had built the perfect family. We lived in a small town in rural Virginia, one of those places where everyone knows each other. My husband, Anthony, worked as an accountant at the only bank in town. We married very young. I was 17 and he was 22. That's how things worked back then. A respectable girl didn't stay single for long. We had two small children, Robert 6 and Lucy 4. I was what they called an exemplary housewife. I woke up early at 5 a.m., prepared breakfast, got the children ready for school, took care of the house, washing, ironing, cooking. My life revolved around my family's well-being. In those days, that's what was expected of a good wife. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Wednesday in July. There was a biting cold in that winter of 1972. Anthony left for work as he did every day, carrying his brown leather briefcase that I had given him for our wedding anniversary. He kissed my forehead, as he always did, and said he might return late because he had a lot of work to catch up on. This wasn't the first time he'd given that excuse. In recent weeks, it had become frequent. 3 times a week, he would arrive after 8 p.m., saying he was too tired even to eat dinner. That day, Robert had been running a fever since the previous night. It was past 9 p.m., and the fever hadn't broken. I decided to call the bank, thinking that perhaps Anthony could stop at the pharmacy on his way home. The bank operator, Mrs. Carmen, answered, even though the bank was already closed. She usually stayed late organizing the next day's calls. "Helen, dear, Anthony left here at 6 o'clock as usual. Hasn't he reached home yet?" Those words hit me like a slap. My hands trembled as I held the black rotary phone on the hallway table. I thanked Mrs. Carmen, hung up, and sat in the nearest chair, feeling my legs weaken. It wasn't the first time I had suspicions. The signs were all there: shirts with unfamiliar perfume, late arrivals, disinterest in the family. And then there were the subtle comments from neighbors, the pitying looks at church on Sundays. In a small town, you're always the last to know what everyone is already talking about behind your back. I put the children to bed and waited in the living room. When Anthony arrived, it was past midnight. He came in smiling with that feminine perfume smell that wasn't mine. I confronted him with what I had discovered. First, he denied it. Then he got angry, accusing me of not trusting him. But when I mentioned the call to the bank, he changed tactics. "It's just a friendship, Helen. You wouldn't understand. You're just a housewife. You don't know what the world out there is like." That night, I cried until I had no more tears. Anthony slept on the couch, and the next day, he acted as if nothing had happened. But something inside me had broken forever. A week later, I was sweeping the porch when Judy, our neighbor, approached the gate. She had always been kind to me, unlike the other women on the street who only talked behind my back. "Helen, I'm sorry to interfere where I'm not called, but I can't stand watching what's happening anymore. Everyone in town already knows that Anthony is seeing the new teacher from the Central School. The woman is from out of town, came from Chicago. They say he's even rented an apartment for her near the bus station." It felt like the ground disappeared from under my feet. One thing was to suspect. Another was to have confirmation. And it wasn't just a passing affair. He had set up another house, another life, parallel to ours. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I took the little money I had saved in secret. I always kept some coins from the grocery money. I left the children with my mother and took the bus to the station. It wasn't difficult to find the apartment. I just had to ask the owner of the corner store. And there he was, entering the building with a young, pretty woman wearing modern clothes that I only saw in magazines. She must have been about 22, with shoulder-length hair, wearing pants, something Anthony never allowed me to wear, saying it wasn't clothing for a respectable woman. I didn't approach them or make a scene as many would have. I returned home and spent the entire night thinking about what to do with my shattered life. In those days, a separated woman was seen as a failure. Divorce didn't even legally exist in most states until the 1970s. How would I support my children? What would people say? How would I face the looks at church, at the market, on the street? But something inside me had changed. Those words of his, "You're just a housewife," wouldn't leave my head. Was that how he saw me? As someone without value, without the capacity to understand the world? It was that night, crying alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone to sleep, that I made the decision that would forever change the course of my story. I would prove to him, to the town, and most importantly, to myself, that I was much more than just a housewife. The next day, while preparing breakfast, I looked at Anthony with a calmness I didn't even know I possessed and said, "I know everything about the new teacher. And you know what? You're right. I don't understand the world out there, but that's going to change, Anthony. That's going to change." He turned pale, but said nothing. He probably thought they were just the empty words of a hurt woman. Little did he know that day marked the beginning of my transformation. Perhaps you're thinking I immediately ran to confront that teacher, or that I packed my things and left my husband that very day. But that's not how it happened. In 1972, a woman my age with 2 small children and no profession had few options, and I've always been the type to plan before acting. The morning after that discovery, after Anthony left for work and the children went to school, I looked at myself in the dressing table mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying. My hair, always tied in a modest bun, seemed lifeless. I was wearing the same floral dress with 3/4 sleeves that I had sewn 3 years earlier. Suddenly, I realized I no longer recognized myself in that image. "Helen," I said to myself, "you're only 25 years old, and you already look like a 50-year-old woman." That's when I remembered Mrs. Matilda, a lady who gave private tutoring to elementary school children at her home. I had always admired her. She was a widow, lived alone, and was respected by everyone, something rare for an independent woman in those days. Once a month, she would go to the city to take courses and bring back new books. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about education. I put on my only good dress, the one I saved for Sunday Mass, combed my hair, and went to her house. My heart was beating so hard it seemed about to jump out of my chest when I knocked on her door. "Helen, what a pleasant surprise," she said, inviting me in. "Is something wrong with Robert? Is he doing well with his lessons?" "No, Mrs. Matilda. I came to talk about myself. I want to study. I want to become a teacher." She looked at me with those wise eyes, offered me coffee, and listened to my story. I didn't tell her about the infidelity. I just said I needed to build an independent future. She didn't ask questions, just nodded. "You know, Helen, it's never too late to study. You finished junior high, didn't you?" "Yes, but it's been so long. 8 years. I don't know if I remember anything." "I'll help you. You can start studying for the high school equivalency exam. If you're dedicated, in a year, you'll be ready to take the entrance exam for teacher training school." She explained that there was a normal school in the neighboring town, 25 miles away. It was possible to go and return by bus on the same day. The course lasted 3 years. "But Mrs. Matilda, how will I explain this to Anthony and the children, and the money for the bus fare?" "One thing at a time, Helen. First, let's see if you really want this. I'll lend you some books. Study for an hour a day when the children are sleeping. In a month, we'll talk again." I left her house with 3 heavy books and a strange feeling in my chest. It was fear mixed with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For a month, I studied in secret after everyone was asleep. Relearning math, English, history, everything seemed difficult at first. My eyes burned with sleep, but something inside pushed me to continue. I hid the books under the mattress during the day. Anthony didn't even notice my new routine. He continued arriving late, becoming increasingly distant. Sometimes he would spend the entire weekend away, saying he was fishing with friends. I pretended to believe him. Each of his lies was fuel for my studies. One day, my daughter Lucy found me studying. "Mommy, why are you reading this big book? Is it a story for children?" "No, sweetie. Mommy is studying to be a teacher like your school teacher." Her little eyes sparkled. "Really? Will you teach other children?" "God willing, one day." "Can I tell Daddy?" My heart froze. "Not yet, darling. It's a surprise, our little secret, okay?" She smiled and promised to keep the secret. That night, as I was putting her to bed, she whispered, "Mommy, you're going to be the best teacher in the world." Those words gave me strength to continue. When I talked to Mrs. Matilda again a month later, she tested me with some questions. I was surprised to realize I remembered more than I thought. She smiled, satisfied. "Helen, you have potential. I'll help you study for the GED. The exams will be in 7 months." "And how much will I need to pay for the lessons?" "Nothing, but with one condition. When you become a teacher, you must do the same for another woman who needs help." That deeply moved me. I promised I would honor that commitment. In the following weeks, I created a routine. 3 times a week, I told Anthony I was going to help at the church with the sewing charity group. In reality, I was going to Mrs. Matilda's house to study. He never questioned it. He was so busy with his parallel life that he barely noticed my movements. The money for future bus fares and school materials came from savings from grocery money and selling cakes and sweets I secretly made for some trusted neighbors. I saved every penny in an empty baking powder can that I hid inside the soap powder box. Time passed, and with it, my confidence grew. I discovered I had a facility for mathematics, which surprised me. English was more difficult, especially grammar rules, but I worked twice as hard on those subjects. One night, 6 months after I started studying, Anthony came home earlier than usual and caught me with books on the kitchen table. I closed them quickly, but not in time. "What's this, Helen? What books are these?" They're books I'm using to help Robert with his homework," I lied, feeling my face burn. He picked up one of the books. Advanced Mathematics for a 7-year-old boy. My heart raced. It was time to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "I'm studying for the GED, Anthony. I want to finish my education." He laughed, a mocking laugh that cut me like a knife. "What for? To be more cultured when you serve coffee to guests?" I took a deep breath. "To have a diploma, to be able to work if I ever need to." His face changed. It was no longer mockery, but anger. "Work? A wife of mine doesn't need to work. This is Matilda's talk, isn't it? That old woman who thinks she's an intellectual?" "It's not anyone's talk. It's my decision." He hit the table, making the books jump. "You're my wife. Your obligation is to take care of the house and the children." I saw a vein pulsing in his forehead, a sign that he was really furious. In other times, I would have backed down, apologized, promised to give up the idea, but something had changed in me during those months. "I'm going to continue studying, Anthony. I can be your wife and still have a diploma." He took a deep breath, as if trying to control himself. Then his tone changed to something that tried to sound reasonable. "Helen, you don't understand how the world works. Nobody will hire a married woman with no experience. You'll waste time and money. If it's a waste, the time and money are mine to waste." I had never spoken to him like that. We were both surprised. He stared at me for a long moment, then took the books and threw them in the trash. "This ends here. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to Matilda to make her stop putting these ideas in your head." He left, slamming the door. After I was sure he had gone, I rescued the books from the trash, cleaned them, and hid them better. That same night, Mrs. Matilda received Anthony's furious visit. The next day she told me about it. He yelled, threatened, said he was going to report me to the pastor, the mayor, I don't know who else. She laughed. "As if I cared. I'm 65 years old, Helen. I've seen men like your husband come and go. We'll continue your lessons. We just need to be more discreet." And so it was. I started studying at Mrs. Augusta's house, a friend of Mrs. Matilda who lived on the other side of town. It was farther, more complicated to reach without being seen, but I was determined. 2 months later, I took the GED exams in the neighboring town. I told Anthony I was visiting my sick aunt. As always, he barely paid attention. Maybe he was even happy to have the house free to bring his lover. The day I received the results was one of the happiest of my life. I had passed with high marks in all subjects. I didn't tell anyone except Mrs. Matilda and Mrs. Augusta. I kept the certificate inside the Bible, the only place I knew Anthony would never look. I had completed high school now. It was just the beginning, but I already felt different. I looked at the future with different eyes. The next step would be the entrance exam for the normal school, which would happen in 4 months. That night, looking at my sleeping children, I promised myself that no matter what happened, I wouldn't give up. I wasn't doing this anymore just to prove something to Anthony or to have financial independence. I was doing it for myself, for the Helen who had dreams at 17 and had buried them to be just Anthony's wife. That Helen was awakening again, and nothing and no one would make her go back to sleep. Preparing for the normal school entrance exam was like climbing a mountain, carrying 2 children on my back. Each page studied, each exercise completed was a small victory against scarce time and fatigue. I woke up at 4 a.m. to study before the house awoke. I took advantage of the time when the children were at school to solve exercises. Sometimes I fell asleep over the books and woke up startled with paper marks on my face. At home, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. Anthony no longer hid his outings. He arrived late with the smell of women's perfume. Sometimes, he didn't even come home to sleep. When questioned, he would look at me with that air of superiority and say, "A respectable woman doesn't question her husband, Helen. You should occupy yourself more with the house and less with books." Each of his words was like gasoline on the fire of my determination. The entrance exam would be in December 1972. Only weeks remained. I studied like never before, memorizing formulas while washing clothes, reciting grammar rules while cooking. On the eve of the exam, news shook our small town. The teacher with whom Anthony was having an affair was pregnant. I found out from Judy, who came running to tell me. "It's for you to know before you hear it elsewhere, Helen. Everyone's already talking about it." At that moment, I felt a void in my stomach, not because of their relationship, to which I was already numb, but because of what it would mean for my children. They would have a half-brother or half-sister, the fruit of betrayal. I confronted Anthony that same night. He didn't deny it. For the first time, I saw a trace of shame in his eyes. "What do you expect me to do, Helen? Abandon a child who isn't even born yet?" "No," I replied with a calmness I didn't even expect from myself. "I expect you to take responsibility, but don't think this changes my plans. Tomorrow I'm taking the entrance exam for normal school." He looked at me, astonished. "And still with this idea in your head? Helen, for God's sake, now less than ever, what will people think? Anthony's wife studying to be a teacher while he has a child with another woman? Do you want to be the subject of mockery? What will people think?" I slowly repeated his words. "That's all that worries you, isn't it? The appearance, what they'll say, not the fact that you've destroyed our family." He shrugged. "That's life, Helen. A man is a man. It happens." That phrase, "a man is a man, it happens," echoed in my head all night. It was the universal justification for all kinds of betrayal, abandonment, and disrespect that women like me suffered in silence, as if it were part of nature, like rain or sun, something against which it was useless to fight. The next day, I wore my navy blue dress, the most formal one I had. I combed my hair carefully, applied a discreet lipstick. I told the neighbors I was going to the neighboring town to do Christmas shopping, but in reality, I was going to take the entrance exam. I left the children with my mother. The normal school building was imposing, an old mansion with marble staircases. I entered with trembling legs, feeling small and out of place. The other candidates were mostly single young women of 18 or 19. There were only 2 other older women like me. I sat at the designated desk and waited. When the proctor distributed the tests, I looked at that paper and thought of all the nights of study, all the humiliations, all the tears. I couldn't waste that chance. The test lasted 4 hours. I answered each question carefully, remembering Mrs. Matilda's advice. Don't rush, read twice before answering. When I handed in my test, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. I returned home, knowing I had done the best I could. Now it was time to wait. The results would be out in January, shortly after the new year. During that month of waiting, life at home became even more difficult. With his lover's pregnancy, Anthony was increasingly absent. When he came home, he was ill-humored and distant. The children asked why their father no longer played with them, why he no longer took them fishing on Sundays as before. The week before Christmas, we were preparing the holiday meal when Anthony unexpectedly arrived in the middle of the afternoon. He came with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shame and determination. We need to talk, Helen. I sent the children to the backyard and sat at the kitchen table. Joanne is in her 7th month, he said, referring to the teacher. It's not fair to make the child be born without a present father. I'm thinking of, well, moving to her house. Even expecting something like this, the news hit like lightning. One thing was to endure the betrayal. Another was complete abandonment. And your children here? Don't they need a present father? He lowered his eyes. I'll visit them on weekends and send money, of course. Money, I repeated bitterly. Is that how you plan to be a father? With money sent from afar? It's the best I can do, Helen. Joanne needs me now. I felt anger boiling inside me. And me and your children? We haven't needed you for years, Anthony. You were only here in body, never in soul. At least now you're being honest. He seemed relieved by my reaction. He probably expected tears, pleas, but that Helen no longer existed. I'll leave after the new year, he said, getting up. You can keep the house. It's the least I can do. I'm not asking for favors, Anthony. I'm demanding what is my right and my children's right. He nodded and left. I sat there at the kitchen table, looking at the nativity scene I had set up with the children. The image of the Holy Family now seemed a cruel irony. That night, after everyone was asleep, I cried in silence. Not for the loss of my husband, I had already mourned that long ago, but for the definitive end of that family I had dreamed of building. As much as I tried to be strong, the fear of the future haunted me. How would I raise 2 children alone? How would I face the looks and malicious comments in a small town where separated women were considered pariahs? Christmas passed like a blur. I tried to keep up appearances for the children's sake, but they sensed something was wrong. On New Year's Eve, Anthony didn't show up. He said he had gone to visit a sick uncle in another town. Another lie I swallowed in silence. In the first week of January 1973, I received 2 communications that would change my life. The first was a letter from the normal school informing me that I had been approved in the entrance exam. The second was Anthony's official announcement. He would leave home at the end of that week. When I received the approval letter, I ran to Mrs. Matilda's house. I showed her the paper, my hands trembling with emotion. I knew it, Helen. I knew you would succeed. And now, Mrs. Matilda, how am I going to study, take care of my children, and the house, all alone? She held my hands in hers. One day at a time, my daughter. One day at a time. That night, I told the children I had been approved to become a teacher. I also said with a heavy heart that their father would be living in another house for a while. Why, Mommy? Asked Lucy, with eyes full of tears. Because sometimes adults need space, sweetie, but he's still your father and will come to visit you. Robert, older and more perceptive, hugged me tightly. Don't cry, Mommy. I'll take care of you and Lucy. Those words from a boy of just 7 years broke my heart. It was I who should be taking care of them, not the other way around. 2 days later, Anthony packed his bags and left without looking back. My hands trembled when I locked the door behind him. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly alone. Classes at the normal school would begin in March. I had 2 months to organize my life. The first step was to look for work. With only the GED certificate, my options were limited. I got a job as an assistant at Mr. Juvenal's grocery store, working part-time while the children were at school. The salary was minimal. It barely supplemented what Anthony sent for household expenses. But it was a start, my first step toward independence. The following weeks were about adaptation. I woke up at 5, prepared lunch, left dinner ready, got the children ready for school, went to work at the grocery store until noon, returned home, did housework, helped the children with homework, and at night, when they slept, I studied. On weekends, I washed clothes, did heavy cleaning, sewed to supplement income, and in the few free moments, I tried to give attention to my children who missed their father. Anthony appeared sporadically, brought expensive gifts, played with the children for a few hours, and left, leaving a void that I had to fill with extra hugs and bedtime stories. At the beginning of March, when classes began, the routine became even tighter. 3 times a week, I took the 5 p.m. bus to the neighboring town, attended classes until 10 p.m., and returned on the last bus. On those days, I left the children with my mother. I arrived home almost at midnight, exhausted but with a sense of accomplishment I had never experienced. At the normal school, most of the students were young enough to be my daughter. At first, they looked at me with curiosity or condescension. Some teachers also seemed to doubt my ability, but they soon realized I wasn't there to play. I studied with a determination that scared people. Maximum grades, impeccable work, exemplary participation in class. I couldn't allow myself to fail. I couldn't fail. This was my only chance to build a different future for myself and my children. Gradually, I earned the respect of teachers and colleagues. Some younger girls began to seek me out for help with their studies. One of them, Martha, became my friend. She was only 18, but had a rare maturity for her age. "Helen," she told me one day, "you're my inspiration. When I grow up, I want to be strong like you." I smiled, not knowing how to respond. I had never seen myself as strong, just as someone trying to survive in the best way possible. The first year of the course was the most difficult. There were days when I thought about giving up, days when fatigue was so great that I fell asleep over the books, days when tears came unbidden, when I heard my children asking when their father would return home. But for every moment of weakness, there were moments of discovery and joy. The emotion of understanding a new concept, the pride of receiving praise from a teacher, the satisfaction of seeing my knowledge growing each week. And so, between tears and smiles, between nights of study and days of work, I moved forward. It was no longer just for revenge or necessity. It was for me, for the woman I was discovering myself to be each day. A woman who was gradually learning to chart her own path in the world. The second year of normal school came faster than I expected. It was 1974, and gradually our routine was established. Robert, now 8, and Lucy, 6, seemed to have adapted to the new reality. Their father appeared sporadically, brought expensive gifts, spent a few hours with them, and left. At first, it hurt to see them anxiously waiting at the window every Friday, often in vain. But over time, even that expectation diminished. My job at Mr. Juvenal's grocery store had evolved. Now I was taking care of the establishment's accounting, which allowed me to earn a little more. On Saturday mornings, I gave private lessons to children with learning difficulties, following in Mrs. Matilda's footsteps. The money was still tight, but we were surviving. At the normal school, I was no longer seen as a curiosity. Younger colleagues sought me out for advice, both about studies and about life. The teachers treated me with respect. Some even encouraged me to continue my studies after graduating. "You have potential for college, Helen," said the teaching methods professor. College, something that seemed too distant a dream for the poor girl I once was. But now, after all I had achieved, it was beginning to seem possible. It was in May of that year that the unexpected happened. I was in the classroom presenting a paper on literacy methods when I saw a familiar face entering discreetly and sitting at the back of the room. My heart raced. My hands began to tremble. It was Anthony. What was he doing there? Why had he come looking for me at school? 1,000 questions arose in my mind, but I maintained my composure and finished my presentation. The professor praised my work, colleagues applauded, but I barely heard. My eyes invariably turned to that figure at the back of the room. When the class ended, he approached. He seemed older. He had deep, dark circles, his hair starting to thin, wearing that gray suit that I myself had helped choose years before. "You were great up there," he said with a shy smile that didn't match the Anthony I knew. "I always knew you were intelligent." "What are you doing here, Anthony?" I asked directly while putting my books in my bag. "I needed to talk to you. It's important." I agreed to talk with him in the school cafeteria. We sat at a distant table, away from the curious glances of my colleagues. "How are the children?" he asked after an awkward silence. "Are they well? Robert won the school's essay contest. Lucy is learning to play the flute, things you would know if you showed up more often." He lowered his eyes. "I know, Helen. I've been a terrible father." "What do you want, Anthony? I don't think you came all the way here to talk about the children." He took a deep breath. "Joanne left me. The baby was born 2 months ago. A boy, Michael. She took the baby and returned to her parents' home in Chicago. She said she couldn't stand small-town life anymore, that she regretted leaving her career in the city to follow me." I couldn't help an ironic smile. "So, she discovered who you really are." He seemed hurt by my words, but didn't retort, just nodded as if agreeing. "I've been transferred from the bank," he continued. "I'm going to the branch in Richmond. It's a promotion, actually." "And what does that have to do with me?" "I was wondering if you and the children would like to come with me. We could start over, Helen, in a big city. Nobody knows our history there. I can rent a nice house. You could finish your studies there." I looked at him incredulously. After all he had done, after destroying our family, abandoning his children, humiliating me countless times, he expected me to simply go back to him as if nothing had happened. "Are you serious, Anthony? Do you really think we can just start over? And what happens when another young, pretty teacher appears in Richmond? Do we have to start over again?" "I've changed, Helen. I learned my lesson." "No, Anthony, you haven't changed. You're just lonely and afraid." "And you know what's ironic? A year ago, I would have accepted your proposal. I would have given up everything and gone with you just to keep the family together, to give my children a present father. But now I know I deserve more." He seemed genuinely surprised by my response. In his mind, he probably imagined I would be anxious to go back to him, to have back the security a husband provided. "What happened to you, Helen? You're different." "What happened is that I discovered who I am, Anthony. I discovered that I can raise my children alone, that I can study, work, have my own dreams, that I don't need a man who treats me like a disposable object, who exchanges me for the first pretty girl who appears. But the children? They need a father. They need a father who respects them and respects their mother, who is an example of character, not someone who abandons his family when a new emotion arises." He sat in silence, fiddling with the sugar bowl, avoiding my gaze. For the first time, I saw Anthony without that arrogant posture, without that air of superiority. He seemed small, fragile. "I still love you, Helen," he finally said in a low voice. Those words that once would have made my heart race now sounded empty. I felt no anger, no joy, no sadness, just a quiet indifference. "No, Anthony. You don't love me. You never did. What you feel is fear of being alone. It's different." I finished my coffee, picked up my bag, and stood up. "I'm going to miss the bus if I don't leave now. The children will be happy to see you this weekend if you want to show up." He nodded without the strength to argue. I left him sitting alone in the cafeteria and walked to the bus stop. A strange sensation came over me. It wasn't exactly happiness or victory. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders, as if I had finally closed a painful chapter of my life. On the bus, looking at the night landscape through the window, I reflected on how everything had changed in such a short time. A year and a half before, I was an insecure housewife who defined herself only as Anthony's wife, the mother of his children. Now, I was Helen, student, worker, mother, and a woman discovering her own strength. Anthony appeared at our house the following Saturday, as I had suggested. He brought gifts for the children, spent the day with them, took them fishing in the river as he used to do. At night, when I put them to bed, Robert asked me, "Mom, is Dad going to live with us again now?" "No, son. Your father is moving to another city because of his job, and are we going with him?" I hesitated for a moment. "No, dear. We're going to stay here. You'll continue at the same school, with the same friends. I'm going to finish my course to be a teacher, but your father will come to visit whenever he can." He was silent, absorbing the information. Then, to my surprise, he said, "I prefer it this way, Mom. When Dad lived here, you cried a lot. Now you smile more." That observation from an 8-year-old child deeply moved me. My children perceived much more than I imagined. Anthony moved to Richmond the following week. He promised to visit once a month and send money regularly for the children's expenses. At first, he kept his promise. Then the visits became more spaced out. Eventually, we learned through acquaintances that he had married again, a young woman from a good family, daughter of a farmer in the region. Life followed its course. My days were filled with work, study, and caring for the children. There was no time to feel loneliness or self-pity. Each small achievement was celebrated: a good grade at school, a promotion at work, the first time I managed to save for a new dress. At the end of 1974, when the school year was ending, I received a proposal that would again change the course of my life. The principal of the school where my children studied called me for a conversation. "Helen, we need an assistant teacher for next year. I know you haven't graduated yet, but your reputation at the normal school is excellent. The professors speak very highly of you. Would you like to consider the position? The salary isn't much, but it would allow you to leave the grocery store and dedicate more to your studies." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. It was a golden opportunity to work in a school even before graduating. The salary, although modest, was higher than what I earned at the grocery store and with private lessons combined. And the best part, I would have the same hours as my children, could go and come with them, closely monitor their education. "But I still have a year and a half of the course ahead of me," I argued. "It wouldn't be the first time we've hired someone who is still studying," the principal responded with a smile. "You've already demonstrated the necessary talent and dedication. The diploma will come with time. What I need is someone with your determination and intelligence." I accepted the proposal immediately. The feeling of finally entering the path I had chosen for myself was indescribable. When I told the news to Mrs. Matilda, she hugged me with tears in her eyes. "See, Helen, I told you you would succeed. This is just the beginning." That night, sitting on the porch of my house, looking at the stars in the clear sky of the countryside, I allowed myself to dream of the future, a future that for the first time seemed bright and full of possibilities, a future that I myself was building with my own hands, with my own strength. The shy girl who once dreamed of a Prince Charming had transformed into a woman who discovered she could be the heroine of her own story. And that discovery, that power that no one could ever take from me, was worth more than any fairy tale. January 1975 arrived with the intense heat typical of the Eastern American summer. I started my work as an assistant teacher at the Montero Lobato Municipal School, the same one where my children studied. My function was to support the head teacher of the second grade, helping students with more difficulties, correcting assignments, and occasionally substituting for her when necessary. On the first day, I entered the classroom trembling. 20 pairs of curious eyes stared at me. Some belonged to children of people who had known me forever as Anthony's wife, who was abandoned. Would they respect me? Would they see me as a teacher or just a separated woman trying to make it? Mrs. Margaret, a lady in her 50s who had been teaching for more than 2 decades, introduced me to the class. "This is Teacher Helen. She's going to help us this year, and I'm sure you'll adore her as much as I do." That simple gesture of calling me teacher, even before I had the diploma, made my heart race with emotion. It was the first time someone introduced me by what I was becoming, not by what I had left behind. The first weeks were a whirlwind of learning. I carefully observed how Margaret conducted the class, how she dealt with the differences between students, how she transformed complex concepts into understandable games. At night at home, besides studying for my own course, I prepared materials to help students with difficulties. Robert and Lucy seemed proud to see me at school. "My mom is a teacher," Lucy would say to her little friends, puffing out her chest. That childish pride was worth more than any professional recognition. At the end of March, something happened that would test me like never before. Mrs. Margaret suddenly fell ill, a severe pneumonia that would keep her away for at least a month. The principal called me to her office with a worried expression. "Helen, I know you haven't graduated yet, but I need you to take over the class entirely while Margaret recovers. I trust your potential. Do you accept the challenge?" My first impulse was to say no. I didn't feel prepared for such responsibility. What if I failed? What if the parents complained? What if the children didn't respect me as they respected Margaret? But then I remembered all the times I heard I wouldn't be capable. When I decided to study, when I confronted Anthony, when I entered normal school. If I had listened to fear, I wouldn't be there at that moment. "I accept, Principal. I'll do the best I can." The first days were the most difficult. Some children tested my authority. 2 boys, sons of farmers in the region, were particularly challenging. One of them, Johnny, even said aloud, "My father said you're not a real teacher." I took a deep breath, swallowed the insult, and responded calmly, "Your father is right, Johnny. I don't have the diploma yet. I'm studying for it." But you know who also didn't have a diploma when he started teaching? Our school's namesake, John Dewey. He was a philosopher and became one of the greatest educators in America through his books. Sometimes what makes a teacher isn't a paper on the wall, but the desire to help others learn. The class fell silent. Johnny lowered his eyes, embarrassed. From that day on, the provocations diminished. I worked double, prepared classes, corrected assignments, studied for my own course, took care of my children and the house. Many nights I slept only 4 or 5 hours, but each small victory renewed my energy. A student who finally understood a difficult lesson, a smile of approval from the principal, a kind note from a mother thanking me for her child's progress. When Margaret returned a month and a half later, she found a disciplined class, advanced in content. To my surprise, she asked the principal to maintain the arrangement where we divided the class. "Helen has a gift," she said. It would be a waste to relegate her to just assistant tasks. In July of that year, the time came for the mandatory internship of the normal course. Normally, it would be necessary to seek a different school to fulfill it, but the principal got a special authorization for me to complete the hours at the same place where I already worked. It was a blessing. I wouldn't need to travel. I could better reconcile the schedules. The second semester of 1975 was one of consolidation. At school, I was already treated as an effective teacher, even though I was officially still an assistant. In the normal course, my professors began to talk about the possibilities after graduation. "You should consider college, Helen," insisted the educational psychology professor. "With your potential, you could do much more." The idea scared and seduced me at the same time. It was an almost impossible dream for a separated woman with 2 children living in a small town. But if I had come this far, overcoming all obstacles, why not continue dreaming? In October, I received news that again changed the course of my story. The Miranda Azevedo Municipal School, the largest in the neighboring town, was opening a competition for permanent teachers. It was a renowned institution with better salaries and working conditions. The registration required only the certificate of completion of the second year of the normal course, which I already possessed. I hesitated to register. It would mean traveling every day to work, reorganizing our entire routine. And there was the fear. What if I wasn't approved? Was I prepared to compete with more experienced teachers, many already graduated for years? It was my daughter Lucy, then 7 years old, who gave me the push I needed. She found me looking thoughtfully at the registration form, sitting at the kitchen table. "Go for it, Mommy," she said simply. "You always say we should try even when we're afraid." That childish wisdom touched me deeply. I really did say that to my children. How could I teach them to have courage if I myself backed away from challenges? I registered for the competition. I studied like never before in the following weeks, taking advantage of every free minute. The tests would happen in November, a written exam of specific knowledge, one of teaching methods, and a practical class for an examining board. On the day of the first test, I woke up before dawn. I took the first bus to the neighboring town with my stomach knotted with nervousness. The place was full of candidates, most younger than me, recent graduates full of energy and confidence. I sat at the designated desk, took a deep breath, and concentrated on the questions. To my surprise, the test seemed easier than I expected. The years of intensive study, the sleepless nights over books, the practical classes, everything had prepared me better than I imagined. I left with the feeling that I had done well. The teaching methods test a week later followed the same pattern. The questions about teaching methods, child psychology, lesson planning, topics I already dealt with daily, flowed naturally. Daily practice combined with theoretical study was bearing fruit. The practical class, the final stage, would be the biggest challenge. I received the topic a week in advance. Teaching fractions to 4th grade. I spent days preparing the material, rehearsing at home for my children, refining each explanation. On the big day, I entered the room where 4 evaluators were waiting for me. I set up my teaching materials, colored cardboards, wooden blocks I had painted, a box of chocolates to exemplify divisions, and began. The designated 15 minutes passed like lightning. When I finished, I was sweating cold, but had the certainty that I had given my best. The results would only come out in January of the following year. I returned to my routine, trying not to think too much about it. The end of the school year was approaching. There was a lot of work to do. At school, we organized a small Christmas party. The children presented plays, sang Christmas carols, parents attended proudly. Among them, to my surprise, was Anthony. It had been months since we had seen him. He was thinner, his hair thinning even more, but well-dressed as always. After the presentation, he approached. "The kids were great," he said with an embarrassed smile. "Robert has a lot of talent for acting." "Yes, he rehearsed a lot," I replied politely. I no longer felt anger or hurt, just a strange indifference. It was as if Anthony were a character from a story I had read long ago. "I heard you took the test for Miranda Azevedo," he commented as we walked out of the auditorium. "Good luck. I hope you make it." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised by the comment. He hesitated as if he wanted to say something else, but just said goodbye and left. Later, Lucy told me he had asked if she and her brother would like to spend the January vacation with him in Richmond. "I said I'll only go if Robert goes too," she explained. Robert, always protective, refused the invitation. "I don't want to leave Mom alone," he said. My heart tightened with that statement. Sometimes I wondered if I wasn't overloading my children with responsibilities beyond their age. "You can go, my loves," I told them that night. "Mom will be fine. You deserve to have fun during vacation." After much conversation, they agreed to spend 2 weeks of January with their father. I organized their suitcases, prepared lists of recommendations, suppressed the fear of seeing them leave. It was the first time we would be separated for so long. On the day Anthony came to pick them up, I held back from crying. I hugged them as if it were forever. I took a deep breath, inhaling the small scent of each one's hair. I kept in memory their excited smiles about the trip. They would be gone until January 20th, 2 days before the announcement of the competition results. Those 2 weeks without my children were strange. The house seemed too big, too silent. I took the opportunity to do a deep cleaning, reorganize closets, prepare material for the next school year. But the nights were lonely. I realized that amid all the rush of recent years, I had never really stopped to confront solitude. The competition results would be announced on January 22nd. On the eve, I could barely sleep. I tossed in bed, imagining 1,000 different scenarios. What if I had done very badly? What if I came in last place? How would I face my colleagues, my students? The next morning, Robert and Lucy had already returned from their trip, full of stories to tell about their time with their father. I tried to focus on them, but my mind was on the result. At noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I asked the neighbor to stay with the children and took the bus to the neighboring town. The announcement with the results was posted on the City Hall bulletin board. A small crowd gathered in front of it. I stayed back, afraid to look. A young woman next to me commented to her friend, "I came in 10th place. Did you see who came in first? Someone named Helen Parker. Never heard of her." My heart stopped. First place? I made my way through the people, and there was my name at the top of the list. First place among 80 candidates. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. I returned home floating. I could hardly wait to tell my children, Mrs. Matilda, the principal of the school where I worked. That achievement wasn't just mine. It was from everyone who had believed in me when even I didn't believe. As I got off the bus, I saw Robert and Lucy waiting at the stop, accompanied by the neighbor. Their anxious faces lit up when I smiled and gave a thumbs up. They ran in my direction and hugged me tightly, the 3 of us jumping together on the sidewalk like children. At that moment, looking at my smiling children, at the quiet street where we lived, at the blue sky of the countryside that witnessed my journey, I knew I had reached my destination. It wasn't the end of the story, far from it. It was just the recognition that the path I had chosen for myself was right, that all the tears, all the sleepless nights, all the moments of doubt and fear had been worth it. The shy 17-year-old girl who believed she needed a man to have value had transformed into a strong, independent woman capable of charting her own path. A woman her children could admire. A woman who perhaps could inspire others to find their own strength. And that, my dears, is priceless. Well, my dears, if you enjoyed my story, don't forget to like the video, comment, and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel for more videos like this. Until next time.